we're surrounded by some of their remains. I don't really have anything to say about it. Yeah, I've never been anywhere like this. It's beyond tragic. So we're outside the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, and it's incredible because it's such an unassuming building when you look at where it is, you know, just compared to all the others. Originally, it was a high school, but it was turned into a notorious prison called S21 by the Khmer Rouge, and unimaginable atrocities took place here. But first of all, before we get into that, I'm just going to give you a quick recap of the Khmer Rouge and the genocide that took place.
Imagine being taken from your home, accused of a crime you never committed, and knowing you'd never see your family again. This was the reality for millions under the Khmer Rouge.
When the Khmer Rouge seized power in the 1970s, they murdered millions of Cambodians in one of the most brutal examples of genocide in modern history.
The Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, believed they could create a communist utopia, a society free from class divisions, money, and modern influences. To achieve this, they forcibly emptied cities, sending millions to labor camps where starvation, disease, and executions became routine. To the regime, knowledge was dangerous, and a simple sign of intelligence could mean death.
And as you'll see today as we walk around, it was a regime built on paranoia, fear, and that resulted in awful persecution of people. So they told us we weren't allowed to film with a camera in here, but that iPhones or that phones are fine, which is why we've bought, for these moments, the most expensive phone money can buy. An iPhone 15 Pro Max. So these rooms were originally classrooms, and there's something really tragic about turning a place that would have been full of the joyous laughter of children and innocence into a torture chamber. And you can see the bed here where the gentleman would have been strapped to the bed and tortured, and they developed techniques to extract confessions from them, but these were all innocent people. They didn't know anything, they hadn't done anything. So it's absolutely tragic, and these things are hard to face, but it's important to do so to understand the depths of what happened here. So as you can see here, this poor chap was obviously strapped to the bed, as you can see in the image there. And 18,000 people were brought here accused of crimes that they'd never committed, and tortured and killed. So it was horrific. And I haven't told this to Amy, but I actually couldn't sleep last night because I was so worried about coming here. I'm someone who really emphasizes with suffering. Like Amy will tell you, I get quite upset when I just think about how hard some people work for low wages, like particularly people like nurses and stuff like that. And yeah, we mentioned earlier that, you know, this regime killed anyone who they identified as educated, essentially. So even if you wore glasses or, you know, spoke another language, you might be a target. And I just couldn't imagine losing Amy for, you know, some kind of fickle reason like that.
First, they shot my wife, who was marching in front with the other women. She screamed to me, "Please run, they are killing me now." I heard my son crying, and then they fired again, killing him.
So this is one of the most harrowing parts of the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, and it's called the Hall of Faces. The Khmer Rouge meticulously documented and photographed anyone who came through the gates. And if you have a look at these, you'll see these are just mothers, sisters, brothers, sons. They're just normal people. And some of these images are really hard to look at, particularly, you know, this one that's blown up over here of, you know, a mother holding her baby. It just goes to show the madness of what happened here.
And if you look here, what I find really interesting is that these dates are dates after my parents' birthdays. So they're literally our parents' generation.
But they've got one of these on the beds in every room. I'm sure it's something brutal, but perhaps someone in the comments can tell us what the significance of that is. That'd be really cool. The incredibly sad thing is that torture has been widely found to be ineffective. Under extreme pain or distress, victims will say anything, truth or falsehood, to make it end. And psychological studies have shown that when an individual is subjected to extreme pain, sleep deprivation, or emotional distress, their cognitive abilities will actually deteriorate, and so you won't get logical thinking.
When eventually I was in too much pain, I told them I had joined the CIA, the KGB, whatever they wanted. It wasn't really a confession, because I didn't answer truthfully, but they stopped beating me.
And intriguingly, in more recent history, after 9/11, when the US were carrying out intelligence gathering operations, they also found that torture was ineffective at securing reliable information. So the really sad thing is that the people who were tortured in these rooms, of course they didn't know anything and they were innocent, but it wasn't even a useful method of extracting information in the first part. And the crazy thing is about these tortures is that a lot of the people who were tortured here admitted to outlandish crimes that they hadn't committed, and then of course just trying to survive, and then of course they were executed anyway. So incredibly sad, and just a brutal regime targeting innocent people. So few survived the horrors of S21 here, but one of them was Chum Mey, and he was, like a lot of people here, systematically tortured, but he was spared because he was a mechanic by trade, and they needed him to fix typewriters. And Chum Mey became an advocate for human rights and remembrance of this place. But it's interesting because a lot of our testimonials come from the stories that we get from people like Chum Mey, the few who survived. And the other thing about Chum Mey is that obviously it's hugely ironic that they kept him around for his skills. The objective of the Khmer Rouge was essentially to get rid of anybody who was educated. They wanted to get rid of people with skills, get rid of Western influence, get rid of religions. They defrocked monks and executed them. The idea was essentially to create a year zero, a new starting point for Cambodia. There was no money, they got rid of private property, they forcibly evacuated the cities, forcing millions to work on farms. And then they brought people here to places like S21 to be executed. And those people would be professors, intellectuals, anyone associated with the former government. And I'm just stood here, and if you look down here towards the gallows, you can see where they would have hung people. There are all these beautiful frangipani trees, and you can actually smell the fragrance coming off them. And it's just incredible, this place, because as mentioned earlier, it was a school, so it held the innocence and joy of children, and you can see around, it's a tropical paradise, and it's just so hard to understand how something so brutal took place in what is otherwise a wonderful part of the world. Sorry, is this Chum Mey? Yes. Oh, wow. So you remember earlier when I was talking about Chum Mey and his story about how he used to fix typewriters? Well, here he is. This is Chum Mey. I wasn't expecting him to actually be here, but this is the gentleman who was a former mechanic by trade and who was spared his life purely by chance because of the skills that he had. And as I mentioned, he does a lot of work making sure people don't forget the atrocities that took place here. Well, you can see here he is at the location S21 today, providing his book for people. How amazing is that? Absolutely awesome. Wasn't expecting that.
9 years old, 1979, 9 years old. My younger brother was 6 years old.
And what's interesting as well is these men are not old. They're young, they're middle-aged men. They're in their 40s, 50s. They're not old guys. And you can see how recent this all was just by talking to these guys. So check this out, viewers. Now, this is something I really like. They've kept the outside originally how it was. So you can see they wrapped the building essentially in barbed wire to turn this school into a prison. And you can see how gnarly it is. And now what you're about to see as well is another form of torture. The solitary confinement, where they would keep people in extremely small cells. So you can see in here the size of these things. And this was someone's life in here. I can't even spread my arms out. Living in here, weeks, months. Unbelievable. Presumably there would have been a roof on it though. It's interesting because it sort of reminds me a little bit of like, you know, Nazis in Auschwitz, but the Khmer Rouge were the Nazis without the budget. It's so sort of haphazardly thrown together, so quickly erected so it would appear. And also you can see that they've knocked through all the way to the end of the school, through every classroom, presumably so that a guard can walk up and down the length of the building to check on all the prisoners. And here are the implements used for that torture. You can see these are just pieces of wire wrapped together of various different thicknesses used to whip people. And then we've got all different types of implements used. It just goes to show the brutality of what went on here. It's unbelievable. Imagine using these things on a person. And you can see the imagination that was used to come up with various ways to horrifically torture people. This whole device would have been filled up with water, and then someone would have been clamped into it face down, a kind of a waterboarding. And then they would have put, I think this would have held insects and various different creatures to put on people. And again, this was something to hold people down whilst they did various different things to them. It's just unbelievable that these things still exist. It's tragic. When I write the scripts for these guys, I often prepare, but honestly, in this case, words escape me. This is the memorial for some of the victims here, and we're surrounded by some of their remains. I don't really have anything to say about it. Yeah, I've never been anywhere like this. It's beyond tragic. So yeah guys, now we're going to go to one of the actual killing fields where the executions took place, but that last bit with the memorial was a lot. You could actually see the bullet holes in the skulls where they've been executed. And I'm always a bit conflicted by these sorts of places because this is not a place to be gawked at by tourists in miniskirts who, reveling in the brutality of it, like you sometimes see when you see people go to like torture chambers in castles. It's meant to be taken seriously. And so yeah, I'm always a bit conflicted by the fact that they become tourist spots, to sort of, I hope people aren't reveling in it too much. So anyway, yeah, now we're off to the actual killing field. Stick around. So we're now in Choeung Ek, which is one of Cambodia's most infamous killing fields, about 15 kilometers outside Phnom Penh. And it's a place where the memory of Cambodia's darkest period still lives. It's estimated that 9,000 people were killed here by the Khmer Rouge as part of the genocide that killed between 1.7 and 2 million. This central memorial here actually houses the remains of those who died. And it's a really shocking thing that I've never seen before, where they've actually used the remains of people, the skulls, as part of the memorial. And it really hits home how we must never let these things happen again. And just this memorial stupa alone holds 5,000 skulls. Unbelievable.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Can I put this up there, yeah?
Yeah, put upstairs, please.
Okay, thank you, sir. So the thing about that is there's so little space between you and the skulls, because they've obviously designed it so that it kind of forces you towards them. So you come face to face with them. It's enormously confronting, but it really leaves a powerful impression upon you. Yeah, that's just a lot, yeah. There's rubbish like all over the place, which is really weird. Maybe they just had an event or something. Can I show you that? But anyway, going back to what I was saying earlier when we were at the school, You can see otherwise that it's the wet season here right now, so it's particularly green, but it's a luscious green landscape. And it's just very hard to imagine the sort of atrocities that took place in what is otherwise a paradise. It's just a beautiful place. When we were in there, you may have noticed they've labelled the skulls with different coloured stickers to describe what the person was murdered with. But it's interesting to see that it was all blunt force trauma, iron rods, axes, things like that. So I was incorrect when I said earlier at the last museum that you could see the bullet holes. It looks like they were iron rods and things like that. And I find that amazing because murdering someone with an iron rod is a very personal, visceral thing to do. You have to imagine as well what was going through the heads, the amount of hatred that the people must have had who were committing these crimes. It's hard to understand.
I didn't do anything wrong. They killed my wife and my children, and they didn't do anything wrong. Why did they kill my family?
So behind me is the Killing Tree, and it's infamous in Cambodia as a place where soldiers would murder children. They would supposedly hold them by the legs and swing them against the tree to murder them in the most morally reprehensible manner. And they did that so that when the children grew up, they wouldn't come for revenge for the murder of their parents. We don't know the people who died here personally, and yet we feel their loss. It's been said by many that grief is the price of love, an agreement etched into all our hearts. And as all-encompassing as love is, so too is grief. So the pain of being here, where many perished, is a reminder that there is love shared among all strangers, a love which reminds us how connected we are and how we must do better for each other.